USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Not all meals are created equal. For instance, breakfast has the spicy egg McMuffin for a limited time, and lunch doesn't. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. Writers will, on occasion, DM me on social media to comment privately about a book that I am reading or an interview that I have given. Often these concern novels of a particular cultural currency for our moment. But I have had the rare experience recently of having several different writers share with me their delight in seeing Amy Stuber's collection of short fiction, Sad Grownups, on my docket of upcoming interviews. It is a surprise only in the sense that the short story, while profoundly impactful in the form and direction of American fiction, has fallen off the radar of big publishers, and therefore the short story loses out in the race for the increasingly diminishing space of cultural attention. It is not surprising, especially once has run a blue streak through the stories collected within Sad Grownups. Amy Stuber's superpower aligns quite nicely with Gertrude Stein's famous admonition to writers. And then there is using everything. The stories of Sad Grownups use everything, by which I mean they use the world and its heaviness and absurdity, the abuse of women and an adult party that turns into a rock fight, and they come to us in many voices, flashing between first person and second person, shouting out to a reader to remember that these stories have been written, have been made. And they gather up every stage of being in the world: childhood, adolescence, singledom, married life, divorce, affairs, violence and despair, the search for meaning and value, and the search for oblivion. In Camp Heather, a 60-year-old takes a job at a Jesus camp, mentoring adolescents who have strayed from the path. In Doctor Visit, a woman visits a litany of doctors, each of whom she is sleeping with, each who promises a better life through medicine and self-repair. In Ghosts, an aimless young woman will rob a bank and then force herself and her crime into the lives of 2 young men. With each story, a body of fiction fills in, and that body ails from the 1,000 cuts of modern life. And singing a song of lament in the background is the natural world in decay. And yet these stories are funny, bizarre, utterly unexpected, and they force our minds to confront the possibility of something new and something different on the horizon. What that difference might be will depend on whether we are willing to extend a hand over the cliff. Amy Stuber's writing has appeared in the New England Review, Flash Fiction America, Plowshares, the Idaho Review, Cincinnati Review, Tri-Quarterly, American Short Fiction, Joyland, and elsewhere. She's the recipient of the Missouri Review's 2023 William Pedden Prize in Fiction, winner of the 2021 Northwest Review Fiction Prize, and runner-up for the 2022 Craft Short Fiction Prize. Her work received a special mention in the Pushcart Prizes, appeared on the Wig Leaf Top 50 in 2021, has been nominated for Best of the Net, and appears in Best Small Fictions 2020 and 2023. She has a PhD in English and has taught college writing and worked in online education for many years. Welcome to Burned by Books, Amy Stuber.
Thank you, Chris. That honestly just made me tear up. That was such a nice introduction. I really appreciate how you've seen and encapsulated every single thing I wanted to get into this book. I really, yeah, just thank you.
Well, I'm very touched by that. Thank you so much. This collection means a lot to me. I really read it in kind of a hallucinatory state. There are 17 very different stories in this collection, but I would say there are underlying themes and ideas and affects that draw the stories into something larger so that it really works as a book. And I wonder how you accomplished that in Sad Grownups. I almost called it Bad Grownups,
Oh,
which I think
we did. Yeah, that
worked well too. Is there something to the ordering and structuring of the stories as a book, or do you think it's simply the shared content and voice?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the themes that you hit on about sort of being an adult in the world and the natural world sort of collapsing around people while they try to have meaningful lives. I think those are the two things that probably for me united these stories because I've been writing short fiction for a really long time and this is my first book and so I have probably four collections worth of short stories sitting around. So
Mm,
most of these were written in about a 5 to 6 year period. So I think it was a time when I was in my late 40s, early 50s, and really thinking about time passing and aging and all the midlife things. And a lot surfaced in my work about how childhood trauma, and I know the word trauma is such like a, I don't know, it's an overused word, but how, the bad things that happens to us in our childhood or just the effects of living in kind of sometimes cruel world pile up at a certain
mhm,
point in midlife
mm.
and start to feel like either you're gonna figure out how to deal with them or you're just gonna keep kind of dragging them around and letting them influence everything you do, and so I think that big theme is the thing that unites all the stories, and then maybe voice as well and sort of construct. I think this was a time when I was really trying to overlay some kind of other element. I mean, I would say maybe meta, but that's not true in all the stories, but it was a time when I would write a story and then look at it and think it was too basic, I guess, for lack
Hmm.
of a better word, and then wanna put something else in it, wanna infuse it with some other voice, some other perspective, some other layer, and so that also, I think, kind of ties them together.
Boy, are these not basic stories, that's for sure. And we'll talk a little bit about the metafictional layers in a second, but I want to talk about, as the title suggests, how many dissatisfied grown-ups exist in these stories. You said, that we at some point in our lives we come upon the fact that we are dragging around this trauma or these collection of afflictions from our youth and our middle age, and we have to decide whether to keep dragging them around. I would say that everyone drags them around, and some do it with like a little bit of grace, and others are just like a big mess. But I'm interested in how, in your litany of dissatisfied grown-ups, it's especially parents who see their lives as stunted or stultified by the expectations for how they will live their grown-up lives. But you don't just leave them to stew. They often lash out. They have affairs, they break their chains, and upend their lives in the process. Can you talk about how your fictions allow you to play out the fantasies of rejecting the structures of parenting and grown-up life in general?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one. I think
Sorry, that may be monolithic to the stories.
it's good. I'm gonna get, I guess, kind of personal. In my own childhood, there was a big tragedy in my family where my dad's family, when I was really young, his extended family died in a house fire. It's
Oh
actually
my God.
something yeah, it's something that I'm trying to write about, sort of as a side project. I'm trying to write kind of a I don't know, sort of family history memoir that starts with that event, and I was really young, and I feel like that affected my parents' ability to parent. They both kind of went understandably went into, like, shock and depression, and I think that that's something in my own adult life that I kind of realized that influenced my own parenting and became kind of a struggle for me personally. And so I think a lot of these parents in sad grown-ups they've either kind of hit a breaking point, or they've, like in the story Cinema, you know at the beginning that the mother has done something really horrible, but you don't really know the facts. But I think a lot of the parents have been unable to parent in ways that feel good to them, and so they end up acting out, lashing out, self-sabotaging, hurting people around them. I may have lost the thread of your question, but,
No.
uh, yeah, but I think that's something that's been really central to me because I never, again, very personal, but these stories are all kind of acting out something that I've probably felt, and I think I never thought I would be a parent and had kids in my late 30s, and it became the most defining thing about me, but it's something in the early years that was definitely a struggle, and so I think this book did allow me to kind of act out some of those conflicts between, like, having a self and having yourself subsumed by parenting. Uh,
Mm.
yeah.
In the story, Are Female Geniuses, one woman suggests that you should get to have two parallel track lives, including one where you detach from expectations and do, quote, anything you want. This seems to match quite well with what you're talking about, but perhaps you could say a little bit more about how your fiction confronts this uh, a moment in life that's often sort of like early middle age or sort of late, I don't know, late beginning of that early grown up period in which people realize that they are on a track and that track seems single threaded and that there's no way to step off. And so the stories allow them to either imagine stepping off or to step off indeed.
Yeah. I think that, and I don't wanna make this just about women because I know that it applies to all people, however you identify, but I think in American society, I feel like there is this expectation that whoever's labeled kind of the primary caregiver is doing 10,000 different things, but supposed to also somehow maintain a sense of self and an identity, which I think is really challenging. So those characters definitely wanna get outside of the strictures of parenthood and personhood that kind of keep them behaving in a certain way and just act with abandon because I feel like that's something that even though what am I trying to say? Even though I think people try to pretend through social media versions of themselves that they are having these very kind of joyful lives full of abandon. I think a lot of people's lives are more rote. And so these stories definitely look at how people cast off kind of the everyday and look for some kind of escape or some kind of abandon.
You drop in a reference to boy mom, hashtag boy moms, which is something that for whatever reason has been at the center of a lot of conversations I've had recently. And that seems to be the, like, I don't know, the apotheosis of how this kind of pretend other track that exists only on social media operates. I mean, do you follow the hashtag boy mom kind of phenomenon at all?
I hate it so much. I'm sorry. Like
Yeah,
I
no, it's terrifying. It's the worst thing. It's the end of culture, I think.
I know. I mean, I am very, very, like, lowbrow in my cultural consumption. Like, I'll watch terrible, like, Love Island and all that because I find it so fascinating, and I think the spinoff of Boy Mom is, like, well, first of all, I have 2 kids, and I never thought of gender as, like, a defining thing about them, and I hear people saying, like, "Oh, boys do blah, blah, blah," or whatever, and that's not true of my kids. They're very much kind of their own it's not like I think they're so special or different, but I think the things we impose on people based on gender are just so limiting, and
Mhm.
yeah, so the boy mom phenomenon is kind of a special kind of mother that I would rather not I'd rather not spend a lot of time with, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I just liked that it was there because I think it is a great stand-in for just the way in which social media and that as a fiction goes off the track in a very unhelpful way, in a very Freudian, terrifying way.
Yeah, yeah, all of that.
So many of the stories in Sad Grownups track the ways in which youth sets in motion the disappointment of later years. As you write, quote, adults carry their sad baby selves around with them their whole lives. That takes manifold forms in these stories, but one through line is young women being harassed and bullied and assaulted by men of all ages. In the story Little Women, a girl playing Amy in a reenactment of the novel lets her mind drift as an extra on the set puts his hand up her skirt. Would you mind reading from this section of the story Little Women? And if you want to provide a little bit of extra context, I think for this story, which is one of my favorites, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So this is a story that I went to see the movie Little Women with my daughter, she's now 19, almost 20, and I can't remember. She was kind of a mid to young teenager at the time, and
Was it the last movie you saw before COVID? Because
probably
it
yeah.
was the last one that I saw for before COVID. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, it's fine. And this is just an embarrassing side note, which I probably mentioned in another podcast. So sorry, you could feel free to loop this out. But I left my car running the entire time we were in the movie, and it was not a short movie. So we came outside, and I don't know, the movie wasn't, I'm not that into Little Women, the book. The movie didn't move me or change me or anything. But coming back out to the parking lot in suburban Kansas and being like, oh, I left my car running for 2+ hours the entire time. And
Oh my
we got in the car, and it just was like such a "this is parenting" moment for me, where my brain was as a person who works like 50 or 60 hours a week and then is trying to write and is trying to parent. I know everybody has hard lives, but it just was a moment when I came back to the car and thought, I can't even turn off my car and like, I can't even do the most basic things right now, and it made me think about kind of what's being expected of people in this, like, hyper productive period in American life. And so that's, I think, what was in my head when I started writing the story, kind of what women are being expected to do. And the context of the story is it's Little Women in kind of a content creation house, so it kind of imagines like a now or near future time of sort of TikTok houses that were, I think, more popular 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, where people are living together and making content, and these people are in an intentionally antiquated looking house playing the roles of the Little Women from the book. So that's the context. Is that
That's great. Thank
set it up? Okay. And here is the excerpt. And this is from Amy, and that's sort of strange as an Amy to read this, but uh,
you.
on a Friday, Amy sits by the pool. The Meg flanks her. They both put their feet in the water. Like most outdoor water, it's no longer cold. Meg is tolerable to Amy, but mainly because she's useful. Amy can say, "Pass me the sunscreen," and Meg passes the sunscreen, even though it's almost empty. Amy assumes Meg will feel virtuous for having sacrificed her own skin to the desert. Even though Amy's role is to look pretty, to be delicate and picture-like, but then sometimes acceptably tempestuous, even though followers might describe her as feminine, which somehow is a thing that still exists, though gender has been laudably chipped away, still, she's more of a boy in her head. Before Little Women House, she worked in a restaurant, and she felt most at home and alive in the dirty basement of the restaurant, smoking on an old couch with the cooks, all men who talked about cars and cunts and all the hard-edged things that made her feel rough herself and with nothing small or pliant about her. At night, the house manager brings a van load of men for content. They film on the front porch, which the house manager calls the veranda. They film in the living room, which the house manager calls the parlor. Amy sits on the plum-colored velvet couch. Many of the men whom the house manager will insist on referring to as gentlemen callers bring her drinks. It's boring, but not the worst way to move through the night, which the house manager calls the evening. One of the men sits next to her, talks about the weather, and then puts his hand under her skirt. It's a challenge because the skirt is what the house manager might call voluminous. Amy lets her mind wander. She's in the restaurant basement and someone is grabbing her by the walk-in, or she's out of the Little Women House corset on a Friday. She's rolling in the sand beyond the circle of the motion light, fucking, and you can't call it anything else. It's the height of life, really, for an Amy, to be urge and movement only, She's out of body, or she's so much her body, that's all she is. Joe at the writing desk, Joe in a replica 19th century military jacket, Joe on a Friday striding, which is hard to do in sand, but if anyone can do it, Joe can. Her brass buttons catch the light, which is glinty and relentless. When she gets back to the house from her walk early evening before the men, her boots are full of sand and sand she dumps in the fire. She looks at the flame and wonders at not feeling more special than she does. She carries a candle powered by batteries up the stairs to her room where she unrolls parchment and furrows her brow, thinking, as Joes do, about a lifetime of impossible choices. She writes a few lines about bleakness and wanting until the night sky is dark fur with punches of stars and clusters that scream out, there are other places very far away. TBH, the Joe story is a harder story to tell in the 21st century when they are all supposed to be all the things: pretty, productive, artistic, assertive, funny, submissive, in charge, living, dying. Before the Friday van comes, the house manager enters Joe's room without knocking and puts out a cigarette on the stone slab where Joe's fountain pen sits. She holds her phone in front of Joe's face and shows her a picture of a pretty girl who posts palm-sized poems about leaves or wind. The house manager says, "Can't you post something like this, a short poem, something nice?" It angers Joe that there's almost no effort in it, that it's so soft and easy. But then her whole life is a defensive posture. It's part of why she came to Little Women House in the first place. A string of nothings in a middle state where she did gig work and rode a vintage bike through cemeteries on the weekends and tried not to think about the future. There, her fingers twitched when she walked from place to place, and the smallest things made her sad. A woman carrying a plastic wrapped tray of sandwiches cut triangle shaped into a church building, or a man holding a sign trying to lure people into a new business that sold tea in bulk bins. All the humans striving up against so much world dying, human dying. Sometimes she made herself a ball in the cemetery and felt the name ghosts, the once weres, descending upon her and wanted also to be gone. When the van rolls up to the house, Joe stays in her room and lets Beth talk her into henna tattoos of vintage typewriters up and down her forearms. Later, when the van goes, Joe, still alone, lonely, sits on her bed and looks out the circular window and beholds scorpions flashing tails at each other on the patio and the crook of the moon over the desert, all of it like a stock image on a website, all of it more endless and boundless than she.
Thank you so much. And honestly, if that doesn't convince the audience to read this collection, then they've come to the wrong podcast. But there's so much going on here in this Amy and Joe section. But really, to kind of follow up on the way that you introduced us to the story, the sense of just endless expectations and impossible expectations placed especially upon women and young women as they confront both the micro of their individual lives, but also the macro of a boundless world that is in pain and in desperate need. And I wonder if you could talk about how the sort of micro elements of characters in this story are always interacting with this macro, both of kind of expectations on women, but also a world in need.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stories in this book and this one particular are probably influenced by having had teenagers while I was writing this. And especially, I think this affects everyone, but especially teenage girls seeing the stereotypically perfect, whatever that even means, images of women just constantly from day one of their childhoods where they've all had phones forever. And what I've seen recently is sort of a move toward being more like natural, which is also kind of funny because none of it is natural, whatever that means too. So I think just in the time that my daughter has been a teenager, I've seen kind of this progression from like hyper made up, hyper unrealistic images of women, then moving toward like a more kind of maybe a slightly more nuanced version of what it means to be a woman in the world, but even that is constructed. So I guess I've been thinking for 10 years probably just about the constructs that we're trying to emulate and then how ridiculous all of that is when we kind of know what's happening with climate crisis. So yeah, that tension is probably in every story.
Yeah, the it just ramps up the ridiculousness and fatuousness and kind of meanness that we will ask, especially young women and girls, to focus on these things that are not only harmful to themselves but useless in the state of the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I think about it a lot with my older kid is in college and my younger kid's about to be a senior, and, this isn't so much about expectations of women, but just expectations of kids in general right now, getting them going through this college application process and, like, the stress and rigor around it and how then, they get to the point of having gotten into whatever college they hoped and dreamed to get into only to find out like, "Oh, the world is dying." It's just
Yeah, yeah.
it's a strange sort of dual reality that we're expecting them to function in and kind of work for things and strive, but then with the understanding that things may or may not be functional when they reach adulthood. So it's just I can't imagine the stress of that at that age.
No, exactly. So in some of the stories, women enact violence as a way of asserting themselves beyond their bodies. In Day Hike, two women hikers push a man who confronts them nearly to his death in both what appears to be an accident, but also an outgrowth of too many times of having been pushed themselves. In other stories, women imagine the ways that men will reap violence upon them and society as a whole. Does literature provide a way to process misogyny? By which I mean, none of these stories was written to be acted on, but it might alter the ways in which we think and imagine the inner lives of women in America.
Yeah, yeah, that I'm not a violent person. I'm kind of a pacifist, but I someone else pointed out to me like there are a lot of crimes in this book and there's like yeah, I honestly didn't realize it until I took a couple steps back how much of that is how much of that acting out on urges, especially around, what you said, women sort of acting out against men. But there is, I think women are fed up and there's a lot of pent up anger around just, after the Me Too movement and generally, I think right now, as American society is becoming more and more Christian and more strict around gender expectations, I feel like in the last couple of years, especially under Trump right now, I do think that people are sort of boiling over, and I yes, I very much think for me, these stories allowed me to act on some of those impulses that I've things that have been kind of buried for many years after my own kind of I worked in restaurants in my late teens, early 20s, and that was kind of a horrible experience, really, with regard to how men treated me and the other women working there. And so I've had my own kind of, I guess, episodes similar to what may be described in Little Women and in other stories here that I think writing that out was very cathartic.
Hmm. Let's talk about craft. You are unafraid of breaking walls, the fourth wall, and generally walls of story structures in general. At moments in some stories, the writer or a writer reveals themselves. In Dick Cheney Was Not My Father, the writer, a man in this case, hears his son ask over his shoulder, "Who is Dick Cheney?" after having peeked at his writing in process. In Doctor Visit, the protagonist visits various doctors with whom she is sleeping to improve herself, her looks, her lifespan. But with each visit, it's clear that we are in the world of invention. And the story ends with a second person call out to the reader. You, dear reader, perched on a rocking chair in your 1800s cap with all your narrative expectations, you will want me to change, to have changed, to have Araby style epiphany to save me from this 2021 life of static downward whatever. But I am sorry, I'm the same. This challenge to the reader's expectations, this refusal of predictable plot and voice, is its own kind of revolt. Take us through the formal revolt in Sad Grownups.
Okay. So I have been trying to publish a book for a really long time, and I think the first iteration of this book was probably more standard narrative, and I have always struggled with plot. And I think the way big publishing is right now, I feel like there are kind of two tracks. You're either doing something that is very, very like save the cat narrative where something big happens and then people are changed by it, or you're doing something that has sort of a concept, like a whatever it may be, like everybody. I can't even think of an example right now, but some high concept thing. It could be.
Like Mobius book?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So something along those lines. And I realized probably in like 2018, 2019, I can't do either of those things. I've tried. So I started every time I wrote a story, I was thinking, how do I kind of break this open? Like what's the inroad for something different to be infused into this story? And not I wouldn't say I think there are a couple stories that don't do that here, but I think most of them have some added layer or element that I put in very intentionally usually after finishing a draft that was more straightforward narrative. I would go back in and want to, I don't even know if elevated is the right word, but expand it in some way. And it was really fun too for me because I have a lot of bitterness about publishing. I'll just say
Mhm.
I mean I just turned 56 a week or so ago, and I've been doing this since the early 90s. And so looking at and kind of making fun of story conventions or publishing conventions and putting little digs at publishing into this book made me feel better.
Well, they are both fun to read, but also a reminder of how much publishing has constricted in the last 15 years, 10, 15 years, both in the number of places publishing and what they want to publish. And that
Yeah.
was, I think, whenever I have a writer of a short story collection come on and talk about it, it's always in either the background or the direct element of our conversation, just how hard it was to get the book published, how much publishers don't want stories anymore, even though most people will tell you if you go to an MFA program, you're going to be writing stories and reading stories, and you're going to be vastly influenced by the formal ingenuity of those stories. But it's
Yeah.
all so compressed now.
I know. It doesn't add up for me. I feel like everything else is shorter form, small bits of things in our lives. And yet publishers keep telling us we don't want stories. I just don't buy it. I mean, most of the people, I think people will read what's presented to them to an extent. And so I think if you go into a bookstore and it's all a certain kind of book, that's what people are going to pick up and read. And I feel like publishers have sort of I don't want to sound like I'm bad mouthing books that are being published because there are so many good ones, but I think the narrowness of what is considered acceptable for readers is limiting to readers and like underestimating the imaginations of readers. And it's sad to me because there are so many things, there are good books being put out, but sometimes I'll go into a bookstore and read the first pages of 10 things and just think they sound so similar that we're missing out on variety because agents and editors are trying so hard, like dancing around what they think people want instead of presenting them with more options.
Yeah, 100% agree. You love a U turn in a sentence, a full slam on the brakes. Quote, when somebody I've been dating off and on for a year calls from the beer cooler of the liquor store where he works and says he has a gun to his head and is going to kill himself, really, because I don't care enough, really. I never did. It's probably best not to embark on a road trip with him the next day. Or sometimes that turn is from minimalist realism to deep lyrical pain for a world in ashes. What's the relationship for you between formal surprise at the sentence and paragraph level and content?
I mean, I love surprises in writing. So, and when you said that about sentences, I didn't realize that about my own work, but I do like to be kind of blunt and surprising. And so, and I love poetry, so I will fit in poetic or lyrical phrases wherever I can, but I know I used to, when I was 30, I'd have like 50 similes on a page or something. And
Uh-huh.
I have learned to cut that down. So I think when they do surface, they maybe feel surprising because I've really strategically paired them out. But I also, just as a reader, I love when something surprises me, sentence level, plot, anything. I just think it's really important to like jar the reader out of stasis. And so I know that I've done that with kind of events and stories very intentionally, I guess, but less intentionally on the sentence level. So I'm kind of happy to know that I was doing that.
Well, yeah, you absolutely are. But I see it also in the more macro elements of the stories. And I guess it does have to do with the fact that you've worked hard to pare down some elements of the story, because when you do turn on the lyrical light switch, I feel like it 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 lights up in a powerful way. At the end of Edward Abbey walks into a bar, there's that great lyrical ending about how all the things that we count on as being stable will go, our bodies and things like that, but also the world. And you say that that fish will be the stuff of tall tales.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I, hearing these quotes, I'm like, oh, I'm pretty like well, I'm not going to swear, but I feel like I'm pretty depressive, or I come by it hereditarily. I think I come from a long line of depressed women, but we also know how to find joy at times. But yeah, I think I do like to weave in some, and I worry sometimes that it's like heavy-handed. The end of that story I wrote on a beach in Mendocino on my phone, and I remember just sitting like, "Oh my god, I love this so much, but it's all gonna be gone." And I didn't wanna say that out loud to my family because that would just depressing, so I wrote it down, and then it became that story.
I'm going to have such a different relationship to that story now. If there is a leitmotif in this collection, I might point to the question that's asked again and again of whether and how we matter in our brief lives on the planet. Will you read just the penultimate paragraph on page 74? This is from Doctor Visit, and it gets to the very point of mattering.
Yeah, yeah. This is, I think you've kind of explained Doctor Visit, but this is the narrator in the story is at an ophthalmologist at this moment, and then she proceeds to go to different doctors, but she's in the ophthalmologist chair at this point. This is something I think about mattering, as in, do we matter? It's a masturbatory thought exercise that undoes itself, as in, the sheer act of thinking about mattering is enough to remind you of the futility of your actions, and thus proof you don't, in fact, matter. And why should mattering matter anyway? But in a practical sense, it's easy to find you do. In moments of immediacy, matter, like fucking in a car on a farm road when the act wouldn't be happening in that way without your essential contribution. But then also, it could be someone else, someone without baby cataracts. You can get Oh, sorry. I didn't. Yeah.
No, no, go ahead, finish it up.
Okay. You can get surgery, the ophthalmologist says, when I'm peeling my legs off the vinyl exam chair and there's an actual ripping sound. When it gets worse, you can get surgery. It hurts, but then they're gone. And maybe that sums up everything. It hurts, but then it's gone.
Well, you weren't kidding about having a depressive turn in some of these some of these stories, but I'm here for it. But I really do think the not depressing element of what you've just read, and something that shows up again and again, is that we are all on this quest for understanding how and if we matter to the world. And I wonder if that's something that you see in these stories, and is that something principal to your act as a writer?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, it feels sometimes kind of self-involved to sit around and try to make meaning of one's own life, but then also, what else are we supposed to do? It's just
Yeah, it's
one.
either TikTok or that. So
Right,
I'll
right.
take that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, trying to make meaning of life, especially in times when we're sort of told in indirect ways that our lives are less meaningful maybe. I mean, we're sort of disconnected from our productivity is often not tangible and for many of us. And so finding ways outside of work that are finding things that are meaningful and make us feel good, I think that's sort of the point of life because everything is really transient. And if you can't find little moments of joy or find ways in which you personally matter to yourself and others, then it's easy to just get very bogged down by negativity. So and for me, that's always been, I think, nature and people. So
Hmm.
yeah, being outside. I mean, there's a lot in this book about the natural world and the outdoors because that's kind of been, at the risk of sounding kind of cheesy, that's been my salvation is just being outside and kind of noticing things outside and connecting with the natural world in ways that kind of make me feel more alive, I guess.
Hmm. That's lovely. Before I let you go, Amy, I'd love to know what you've been reading and loving recently, and if you have anything you'd like to recommend.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up my book list because my memory is terrible.
Yeah.
I will say I had never read Bobcat by Rebecca Lee, and somebody mentioned it to me, and I loved that. I'm also just like a huge Joy Williams person, and so I have been rereading her work, and I can't say enough about The Quick and the Dead. That's probably one of my all-time favorite novels, and I used to teach
Oh,
it.
wow.
What did I Oh, and then I just read, I don't know how to say her name, Sonia Walger's Lion, which I thought was amazing. And, oh, I read sorry about that. I read Leave by Shane Terry from Autofocus, and that was just like this kind of harrowing, beautiful look at postpartum, at what can happen to the body postpartum.
Mm.
Mm, I'll leave it
You
at
know, I'm embarrassed to say I've never read any Joy Williams.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
I her one of my, I think, a claim to fame is that I've gotten my daughter and son both into Joy Williams, and now I can die happy. That and Pavement, and my son just got into Pavement, so
Oh, amazing. Oh,
yeah, so I'm like, now I can just go.
well, I will use this as the catalyst to finally dig into Joy Williams. And Bobcat has been on my radar for sure for a while. And while I don't know the other two, they sound fantastic. But I can't say enough about Sad Grownups. And this is a collection that will last for me. And if you are a short story lover, it's one that will just deliver up just surprise after surprise, course after course of a genuine meal of fiction. And it was a real pleasure to get to talk to you about it, Amy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, I really appreciate it, and, again, your synopsis at the beginning really moved me to tears, so I that was so nice of you, thank you.
Well, it was a real pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we'll do it again soon.
Alright, sounds good, thanks.
Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Amy Stuber for coming on to talk about her debut story collection, Sad Grownups. You can find links to purchase Sad Grownups and all of Amy's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.